You don't have to wait until you reach financial independence to start enjoying your life. You can do that much earlier and start living a life that you love and that's true to you. Welcome to Freedom Before FI. Using FIRE and life design techniques, we help you create freedom on your way to FI instead of waiting until you're retired to do the things that light you up. I'm your host Greg, a FIRE movement and life design enthusiast. If you're itching to get freedom now, then let's do this. Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Freedom Before FI. This will be the third and last part of the mini-series about alternative retirement options. On the first part, we talked about mini-retirements, and on the second part, we discussed semi-retirement. Now on this episode, we'll be talking about phased retirement. Now phased retirement is similar to traditional semi-retirement, and it's one way to reduce your working hours from 5 days to say 2 to 4 days a week. It's called phased because, like semi-retirement, it's a step before full retirement. But the slight difference is the use of a specific strategy to get there. Some countries call this strategy the Rule of 55. In a nutshell, it's accessing money from your private pension plans or workplace pensions when you hit the age of 55, which is the earliest you can get it. Of course, this depends on what country you're in and the pension plan itself. Alright, so the two key words here are private pensions, because we're not talking about your state pension, which you can't get until much later in life. So the money drawn using the Rule of 55 can cover some of your living costs, giving you the option to work less hours. Of course, this depends on how much you have in your private pension pot, what your expenses are, and if you have any debts to pay. You can then continue doing this until you get your state pension in your late 60s. Okay, so let's look at how you can go about getting this strategy. Of course, this would largely depend on your private pension plan and what country you're based in. So for example, in the UK, if you looked at state pensions first, you can get state pension payments at around 66 to 68. But with private pensions, like your employer match type ones, you can access them at age 55. So just a quick note, you can withdraw up to 25% without paying tax, while the remaining 75% of your pot will be taxable. In Philippines, where I'm living right now, you can access Social Security or what we call SSS at age 60. There is, however, a voluntary retirement plan called PERA or PERA. This is known as your Personal Equity Retirement Account, which can also be accessed at age 55. Now in the US, the earliest I believe you can get Social Security payments is 62, the standard being around 66 to 69. But for private pensions, like your employer match type ones, so things like your 401ks, I believe you can start to draw down at 59 and a half. But there are scenarios where you can withdraw them from the age of 55 without paying the 10% penalty fee. Alright, so let's go over to the pros and cons. Okay, so the first pro is that the Rule of 55 allows you to access your pension money much earlier if you really need it. You can think of it as an extra safety net. Now the second pro is that you can access the money penalty free. Obviously this depends on the country and the plan policies. And now the third pro is that the strategy lets you work less or even take a less stressful role leading up to retirement. And it gives you the chance to gradually transition into full retirement instead of going head first. Alright, so let's look at the cons. Admittedly, there are a bit more cons than pros here. Anyway, so the first con is, of course, the glaring con is you actually need a private pension to begin with. Obviously, you can't do this strategy without having a private pension. Now, the second con is the amount you can withdraw from your pension pot depends on how much is actually in there. So you need to have a decent amount to obviously take out a decent amount. Okay, so the next con is depending on what country you're from, some pensions may not be able to be withdrawn that early, or there might be penalties involved with early withdrawal. Okay, another con, it does take a bit longer to wait if you're much younger and want to get freedom sooner. Okay, so the last con is that the Rule of 55 age may even change in the future. It may even increase, meaning the age at which you can access the money will take longer. Alright, so those are your pros and cons. Personally, I see this method not really being under your typical FI umbrella of strategies. Of course, the ideal scenario is reaching FI or FIRE, and getting your private and state pensions are seen more as a bonus or as a cherry on top. However, these options are available for you to use if you need it, especially if you've built up a good chunk of employer-matched pension money. Alright, so those are the 3 alternative retirement options. I hope that gives you some freedom strategies to ponder before getting to FIRE. In general, these 3 options focus on lifestyle design and living your best life now, instead of just aggressively accumulating money. It's about doing more living and less working. And if that's your priority right now, then those are some options to look into. Oh, and just remember, these are all optional. You can still choose to go straight to FIRE if you want. Even if you're in the middle of one of these options, you can always go back to full-time employment if you really need to. Now, if you're not sure about these options, you can even test the waters first, like try a mini retirement. For example, maybe take 1 or 2 months off first instead of taking 1 to 2 years if you're really worried about taking a longer break. Personally, I'm a massive fan of mini retirements and semi-retirement. Both are plausible options you can take if you really want to start living more now. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some good food for thought. As always, please send me an email if you have any questions or if there are any other topics you want me to tackle on this show. Alright, so let's go over to the key takeaways. So on this episode, we discussed what exactly phased retirement is, which is taking advantage of early access to personal pensions to give you some income to help cover living expenses. This is usually at the age of 55. This allows you to reduce your working hours before transitioning to full-time retirement. We then talked about how to access it. For example, the UK and US are quite similar in that you can access your private pension plans or workplace pensions at age 55. While in Philippines, where I'm living right now, one option is to invest in a voluntary pension called PERA, which you can also access at 55. And then on the last part, we talked about some of the pros and cons to think about. I think we had a few more cons to consider. However, at least this strategy gives you an option if you hit 55, have a good private pension pot, and need some extra money at that point. If you think this episode would help a friend, please don't hesitate to share it with them. The show notes can be found at freedombeforefire.substack.com. If you have a question or want to connect, feel free to send me an email at freedombeforefire@proton.me. That's freedombeforefire@proton.me. If you found this show useful and want to be notified of future episodes, you can follow us on Spotify or Apple via the show's main page or on whatever app you're using right now. And lastly, if you've just learned one good thing that will help you in your journey and you want to help us out here, please do leave a 5-star rating on your podcast player app. If you're using Apple Podcasts, you can even leave a nice review by scrolling to the bottom of the podcast page. That would help us out loads. Alright, so that wraps up the show today. And as always, practice gratitude, live life by your design, and do things that make you smile. You got this.